Well, good morning,
Just trying to
everyone.
show how short I am.
As Sean said, my name is Anna Sullins. I work in the Training and Development Department, and we're so excited to partner with you all on this storytelling initiative. We know that storytelling is incredibly important to Biltmore for a number of reasons. I think primary is you all. Stories enhance your employee engagement because it provides you a greater context to the job that you're doing every day. We also know that stories make an emotional connection with our guests, enhancing their experience, creating loyalty, repeat visitation, referrals, all the good things. And certainly Biltmore has thousands of historical stories from the 1800s and beyond, the beginning of the Biltmore story. But today we're going to focus on stories from a more modern era, of course, the winery. And so we have Bill and Jerry here today to share some of those stories and their memories of the early days of the winery. This is going to be very casual, just really a conversation. And I'll prompt their stories with some questions and just let them roll with it. So, you ready?
Sure.
All right, let's see if we're here.
Does anybody know what this building was? The space?
Yes.
When we opened
Very
No, the space that we're in right now, when we opened the winery, what was it? Well, no, when we opened the winery.
It was a theater.
It was a theater. This is both of the theaters when we opened, which is part of the tour of it. Anyway, sorry.
All right.
It didn't go well.
It's going to get better, I promise. So the first question is, can you all share the initial leadership team for the winery, maybe who they were, what it was like during that time being here?
You want me to take that or you want me to?
I'll start and you can add to it. The initial leadership team, my dad decided in 1983 that we were going to open a winery. In 1982, Biltmore Dairy closed and sold their licenses over to Pet, or leased their licenses over to Pet Dairy, and we all of a sudden had a big farm with no animals or anything on it, and he decided by 1983 that we needed something, and so it was going to be a beef cattle operation, and then what made more sense at a French chateau than a French-style winery? It would have been handy if he'd done a little more research on growing grapes in Western North Carolina. It's been very difficult to actually do, as we found out over the years. But the initial team he put together was a man primarily named Maury Winger. I worked for Mr. Winger, and he was an American Inca or an Exona executive that had retired to this area, or finished up. And what he did for his career 7 or 8 times during his career was show up at manufacturing plants that were underperforming, according to the parent company anyway. And he would, the CEO or president of that division would be ordered to cooperate fully with Mr. Winger while he turned your division around or closed it. And he did that 7 or 8 times during his career, each one taking 3 to 5 years to do. And I worked for Mr. Winger. He was a Marine Corps aviator in World War II who helped figure out how to use radar as a strategy, because it was a new technology and trying to figure out how to do it. And I mention that not to brag on his Marine Corps experience, but more because if you think he was tough, you're right. He was really tough. He was one of these guys that you didn't, when he told you to jump, you didn't ask how high until you were already on your way up. And I learned a lot from Mr. Winger. I wish I could work for him to this day. He died when he was 96.
Wow.
When he was 92, he got bored living in Florida and moved back up here and built a house. And lived in that house for about 4 years, and then he ended up living in a condominium over there, kind of near where Nettlewood Nursery used to be, here, something where that pond is with the geese in it down there on Hendersonville Road near the Parkway. But anyway, I mentioned him. The other people on the team were Steve Miller, who worked for us in marketing, Jerry, who also worked in marketing. The key contractor was a guy named Howard Liner of Haywood Construction, and they got the bid. And another leader of the team was Jim Padgett, who was the architect for the facility. And then Philippe Jourdain was our winemaker at the time. And Philippe had started here in 1978, making wine, I believe, illegally. I'm not sure we had a license. Then I was told later we had something something he referred to as a semi-works license. I'm not quite sure what that meant. But we were making wine in the basement of the greenhouse over on Main, across the way. And we've done that a few years and then decided to get an actual license. And we opened this facility for the front end in '85 and the harvest the year before and started construction in '83.
Well, I was just going to say, when we opened the winery, Bill was the manager of the winery. And Ann Ashley was his assistant. We were divided into 3 areas. We had tours, tasting, and retail. Sound familiar? And so anyway, so that was the way it was set up. The center portion, just on the other side of this roof, the main wine sales area, was a courtyard. We had a big oak tree growing in the middle of it. And then it was built around the courtyard. You had, as we actually started working, I came to work here in 1984, but for 3 years before that I worked for an advertising agency that did work for Biltmore, and I did some work around some market analysis for selling wine, not so much for growing grapes, but we did some market analysis for selling wine, but we also connected on tours and tried to understand how our customers would react to having a winery, which was kind of unusual in the South in those days, here in the South. This being Bible Belt and North Carolina not being a traditional wine-growing state in recent memory. So there was a lot of work on the front end of that. We did focus groups. We did some other research to try to understand our guests' perception. Although I don't think we called them guests back then. They were visitors. So anyway.
Nicer than tourists.
Yeah. and so, you know, and if you think about the experience back then when you came here, you went to Biltmore House. We had just opened the downstairs in Biltmore House a few years before. We had one restaurant. We had no retail shops. This was the first retail experience we had on the estate when we opened here. And so we've come a long way. When we first opened, the sequence was, I'm trying to think who the supervisor was. Lori Venturelli is the only name I can remember.
She was in the
but anyway, when you came in here, we gathered you in the front room there. That was the entrance, not the exit. That was the entrance, and we gathered people there in groups of 60, was that right? About 60, and then we had a little bit of an orientation presentation, moved them to the theater. The theater was we had 12, does anybody know what a 35 millimeter slide projector is? we had 12 35 millimeter slide projectors that went together to present along the back wall. And one of the biggest problems we had that Bill used to, I think it aggravated him a little bit, is that if they bounced or somebody would nudge them, they'd get out of register. And so where we were supposed to have one seamless picture, it kind of funny. So trying to balance those things and then replacing the light bulbs was always a big those things, the bulbs and the projectors, they burn out all the time very fast. So anyway, so you came out of the projector, doors magically opened, you walked out to Scholars Walk. Scholars Walk had panels that had communications on it, had diorama over here underneath the stairwell, and then up into the clock tower where you had audiovisual presentations and things. In the clock tower, worked through there, downstairs into the tunnel, then back up into the tasting room. Sale was made in the tasting room. Find a wine you like was that was the. I think it still is. Find a wine you like, and then once you move into the retail experience, and that worked out pretty well. What else was from a leadership standpoint? Who else was here? I can't. Warren was the only person I could.
Also, Bill Lynch, who helped run the plant for years and years. He was our plant manager, working with Philippe and then later with Bernard. He retired, 3 or 4 years ago now?
Probably 8 or 9.
I remember the first management meeting we had after he retired. We turned around and asked to introduce any new people from the wine company, and please stand up. And Bill Lynch retired, and 3 people stood up to replace him. That was pretty cool. So he was a great guy to work with, and if you had any kind of problem, whether it be plumbing or electrical or logistics or carpentry, You just ask him, and next thing you know, it was taken care of.
It's like MacGyver.
Yeah, not like that, actually.
Let's see. That, you know, one of the...
I'm sorry, you had a question about...
Hey, that I wanted to, what were the initial wines that you sold? Was there one that was the big seller?
Well, we were very creative at that time. We had, the other thing I used to get to work on was wine labels. So I'd gone through, I hadn't counted out how many wine labels I worked on since I became over. But before we opened, we decided that we would give you a passport. When you came to enter, we would give you a passport. And each passport had a wine on it. And what was interesting, we were all about production efficiency back in those days, and we still are. But it was all the bottles were the same. We used W51 champagne green bottles, and everything looked the same. The labels all looked the same. We decided that because, and we learned this in focus groups, that varietal designation, French varietals, were hard to pronounce. And so we decided we would help people along. Also because after the freeze of 85, we had to source grapes, more grapes in California, and keep supply chain differently. And there's some federal regulations about appellation and whether how do you use Cabernet Sauvignon or Sauvignon Blanc on the label. So we had to adapt. And so we decided that what we would do, Chanel No. 5 was a big perfume at the time. So we decided to number the wines. All the even numbered wines were drier wines, and all we had were white wines at the time. Because red wines age, we didn't have aging capability, or we were just beginning to age. So even numbered wines were dry, odd numbered wines were sweet. And so you could come in and you say, 10 was Chardonnay, dry Chardonnay. 15 was sweeter Riesling, 14 was dry Riesling. 16 was Sauvignon Blanc, 19 was Chenin Blanc. And so we were trying to make that easy, and it worked really well here when you control the environment. When we started to test out in the marketplace, it was really confusing. So we opted for dropping back. Wines were priced, we tried to keep everything around $10. That was a magic barrier back then, and unfortunately it still seems to be a threshold point. It's changed a little bit in the last 35 years. Not much. But anyway, and so what we found with the wines, we sold an awful lot of Riesling was a big item for us. Sweeter wines, 15 and 19 were big sellers for us. The big thing for us is when we opened the experience here, we changed ticket price. And you can help me with this, but my recollection is the ticket price went from $7.50 to $12.50 when we opened the winery.
That's about right. We had a 16% increase in attendance. I remember that part. We opened the winery to see what was new on Biltmore Estate. It was a huge year-over-year increase that was somewhat anticipated, but not anywhere near that.
Well, we drove it. All the marketing messaging at that particular time was introducing the winery, and we had a funny story. Philippe, you've seen pictures of Philippe, very distinguished looking, and he was in a store one time, and a lady came up and kind of started pointing, "Hey, I know you. I know who you are. You're the actor that plays the winemaker in the movie." He got all flustered. "Go ahead, Mike. So,
some of the other questions that you asked about things we did on the tours that we did right or wrong and kind of mistakes that we made. One of my most memorable times here when we were first opening was this place had been abandoned since 1959. And it had been used as what we loosely refer to as miscellaneous storage. That means just anything we didn't know where to put got put here and forgotten. And it was basically caved in. Some of the areas that were the main tank room now had silos in them, and the flashing around the silos had degraded, and it got water down in there, and the place was all caved in. And when we first opened, we were real pleased with the facility, people down in the basement. But we displaced a lot of native creatures that lived here. Construction process, and I was in the office upstairs, and all of a sudden you hear this screaming dash of people as we pulled these people through. at about 30 to 50 at a time for the theaters. They kind of went through the thing at 30 to 50 at a time. And when we get down there, somewhere kind of in the underground where the restrooms are down there, but a little further than the stairs, was about a 6 or 7 foot black snake that had come out of the rockwork to find out what all these people were doing in his previously private area where he hunted successfully a lot of mice, rats, and other things. He was huge. Or he or she, I don't really know how to sex a black snake. The guest came out of the basement, just hair on fire. Crazy. And I went down, got the black snake, and put him in my gym bag. I took it out here and put it over at the horse barn. So as far as I know, it's still over there. It's moved from one old barn to another old barn to be fine. There's no real problem. Big snake though. And the guests didn't really appreciate that. We also had a lot of flies, and when we started doing, there was the guy Leland, we referred to it as Leland's Cafe. We had a little snack area over here after a couple of years, served black beans over rice, and then some wine with it, just something real simple, trying to tie food and wine together. And we had a lot of flies because it was an old barn, and it had been abandoned for a long time, and the flies were, 100-year-old flies here, and I just get a lot of complaints about that because of the flies. A lot of people didn't grow up out in urban areas or rural areas anymore, and they're used to being in urban areas, and flies kind of freak them out, especially when they're having to share lunch with them. And so I would tell them that those flies are protected by the curatorial department, and if you were to grab one, you could find a little barcode. Go back to the time of the Vanderbilts, and some of the people thought that was really funny, but some of the folks from the cities, they just thought that was stupid. Kind of plain to me that I've been living out in the country way too long to think that was okay. But we had a lot of little stories like that with the guests that we tried to work our way through. And of course, a lot of the guests didn't come to the winery to taste wine kind of like they do out in California. They came to see Biltmore House, and then they came to learn a little bit about the ongoing agricultural story, which was also what we tried to explain to them, the history of sustainable agriculture, different things here. So it was a lot of learning along the way with that, trying to figure out what would connect, to be able to sell more wine. And my dad had decided, just in a moment of inspiration, I suppose, that we were going to have 3 bottles sold to every guest. And so he decided that, and then he built the pro formas up on that number. And then the average bottle price was going to be around $10, and 3 bottles per guest, and then that was going to enable us to pay for the Wachovia back on the mortgage that we took out on the facility. And of course, it worked out that we sold 1 bottle for every 3 guests. And that's quite what we had in mind. And that's what prompted us to start retail. We had what we called sales of views, which meant a guidebook, a strip of slides, 35mm color slides, and a deck of postcards. And those 3 items were our retail items prior to opening the winery. And we weren't allowed to sell T-shirts. My dad thought that we would, actually I'll just put it directly, I will be damned if I'm going to sell underwear. Aristocratic British gentleman, stubborn, and he will not sell underwear. And my brother-in-law, Chuck Pickering, decided that we weren't selling underwear, we were selling crew shirts. These are the types of shirts people crew on sailboats, and it's not the same. And so we were allowed to sell T-shirts down here in ball caps and different things, and then wine glasses and wine-related items and cookbooks, and then it grew from there. But I remember one of the days we used to always compete down here to see who could beat the Carriage House, because when the Carriage House got into the game, they were the #1 sales point every single day of the week, all the time, year in, year out, because of the proximity coming out of Biltmore House and the really nice way the Carriage House was set up. And we were always down here competing against the Carriage House. And finally, we were losing, and I'm kind of competitive, and so I put one of the winery personnel out in front of the exit at Section 6 up at Biltmore House, and that winery person would remind the guests that the winery was included in their ticket. And we had a beautiful retail shop, and we also had food down at the winery, so there was really no need for them to go there. Carry it down. Or the Stable Cafe, for that matter. The Stable Cafe at that time basically sold sandwiches with a chicken salad sandwich in a basket. And it's really different than it is now, but it was quite successful. Everybody went straight to their car and headed down to the winery. And next thing I know, I'm called into Mr. Cecil's office, and Maury Winger and I are in there, and it's like, just what the hell do you think you're doing? You know, well, you told me to make my budget, you know, budgets are important, and we weren't making our budget. And magically, with this person out there redirecting everybody, you're making a budget. You might be making your budget at the winery, but the overall company's budget has gone down. And so it's kind of an interesting lesson. Years later, when I became chief executive officer in 1995, one of my friends from high school, his older brother, who worked in the State Department for his whole career, he welcomed me to the ranks of what he called the Captain's Club. And he said, once you're in charge of the ship, it never looks the same again. And he had been a captain of many different ships in his career in the military. And it was absolutely right. I began to see exactly what my dad was seeing when I was putting the winery ahead of the welfare of the whole company. And immediately that became clear to me through some of those kind of learnings.
You touched on this a little bit. What were some of the early challenges that you all experienced, and what changes or even experiments that you made to overcome whatever those expected or unexpected challenges were?
Well, the thing about the 3 bottles for every guest, that was the one that derailed us completely within about a month. We knew we weren't going to make our numbers, we weren't going to be able to pay the bank back, and so we had to figure it out. My dad made it plain to me. He said, your future here depends on your ability to figure this out. And so that kind of helps focus your attention. I had hoped to have a future here, and I realized that all of a sudden I might not. And that was kind of a jolt. But we worked it out, and Ashley and Jerry and I, we tried to figure out different things. The guests were not that receptive to dry wines. Philippe was not that receptive to making sweet wines. That hasn't changed much over the years. So we tried to figure out compromises and different things. Price point was something we worked on a lot. This didn't have competition kind of like it does now after Hill Village. We're now getting about half, or maybe just slightly more than half of the guests that come through the main gate here at the winery. At that point, we were getting 75% because there was no competition with Hill Village or other things for your time. And they stay on Biltmore Stay. It was only 4 hours, and now it's a little over 8 for your average day guest. And so the people were still fresh when they got here. They weren't quite as tired as they are when they're here now. So some of those things had to be factored in. I don't know, it was an interesting time to try to figure out all this. We've gone back and forth with tour elements to retail elements to tour elements to catering to display kitchens to no display kitchens to wine bar here, wine bar over there. I mean, we just moved it all around. You know, one of the things when we put the show kitchen in there to have the chefs do the wine and food pairings and stuff, we thought that's a natural fit for a winery and a real good idea. It's just never really resonated. A lot of the chefs that did it ended up saying it was not their job to stand up and do the presentation kitchen. They were a chef that was not a show chef, but a chef that actually worked. And, you know, there was sort of tension in there, and some of that stuff is real and some of it's just imagined, but the guests never really resonated with that as well as we'd hoped. The wine bar here out here, it's been really well received. I'm not quite sure what makes this area so much more well received than it was when it was just right over there doing the same thing. It's interesting, but this indoor-outdoor kind of setting creates a real nice feel even on these hot, muggy days.
I think one of the other things that stands out for me, Bill, is visitation is key. It's key today. It was key 35 years ago. And when we first started Candlelight Christmas, we found that people would have candlelight and they might not get it. And there were two issues that we had. When you came out, we drove everybody right by the winery, but the turn was such that you might not see it before you would buy it, and then you might not, oh, well, I missed that. I need to loop back and park. So it was frustrating, I think, and I think, Bill, you were still down here. But there were two issues. One was we had landscape architects from London, Cobham and Associates, and they did a really nice job making it seem like this had been here forever, and it fit in here, and it was wonderful. So you couldn't see the dang building. So Bill's deal was, hey, I've got a chainsaw in my truck. Let's go clear out the view shed a little bit. So that was one.
Well, and Bill Alexander also planted these bushes in front of our signs so that they'd grow up, and he thought they were nicely landscaped. And after a while, Ann Ashley and I always carried pruning shears, and we'd go around and cut all of the bushes down so that they could park. I mean, you can't park unless you see a sign that says parking. And it was basic stuff.
And then when people were exiting for candlelight, Bill, and this may just be urban legend, but Bill actually stopped folks in the middle of the road saying, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing that?
That's a good manager.
Haven't you had fun? Yeah, this is a little bit more. And just trying to get, I think it was more market research than anything else. He was just trying to understand what we call that in marketing, that's an intercept. So.
Yeah, well, I'd stand up right at the intersection and I'd point them down toward the parking. Right this way. They would stop and they'd roll the window down. And they said, why would I want to go down there? I said, well, it's the winery's open and it's here, it's really nice, and it's part of your tour, you've already paid for it, and don't you want to see it? And they'd look at that nice warm car and how cold it was, and the fact that they had been in trouble with their spouse, and that's why they were here, was to get out of trouble with their spouse. And the tour of Fillmore House had gotten them out of trouble with their spouse, and so they were headed to a hotel, and we were trying to compete against that. And they were not interested. They're like, now, there's this work.
I just had a quick question about your perspective, because we talk a lot in our story about the challenges of growing grapes. And my question is, can you elaborate a little bit on why, even though we have so many challenges with our climate, why it was important for your vision to have grapes planted here on property?
Well, initially, when we first started this, tobacco was kind of on the way down, and a lot of the farmers were going out of tobacco, and the government was removing allocations, especially for the high-end blue pure tobacco up in western North Carolina that so many farmers up here relied on. And my dad's vision was to replace that with high-quality wine grapes in a way that would be appropriate for people to have the same dollars per acre approximately. Tobacco is still a little more valuable per acre at about $10,000 per acre of profit, and wine grapes in California are more like $4,000 or so per acre profit, maybe $5,000. But in California, and we had hoped that would replace that industry up here. The reality of it is, with all the rain that we get, the varieties that we try to grow that people know, like Merlot and Pinot Noir and Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay and Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc. We didn't realize at the time, but later did a lot more soil analysis and soil study. Sauvignon Blanc, for example, needs to have a real limestone-based soil, and we have a real acidic soil with red dirt and red mud. And it just doesn't grow okay, and it produces some fruit, but it doesn't taste right because of the French term would be terroir. It just doesn't work right. Pinot Noir, one year I asked Bernard, he said, at least this year, the Pinot Noir is chemically recognizable as Pinot Noir. And I said, oh, you're having a good year? And he said, oh, no. And so, traditionally, the grapes that were grown here were the native grapes with Concords and Muscadines and things, and they actually grow pretty well. We initially did grow some French-American hybrid grapes. The idea, though, was that to be a recognized wine regions, we needed to have grapes that are grown in our region. And that was not just for marketing, but at the time, the California wineries would say, well, you're not a real winery if you just produce wine. You've got to grow and produce wine. They would use that as a marketing slap to try to give their wine more credence. It's the same thing that the French used to do to the California people. You're not a real winery. Wines come from France, or good wines. And Mondavi fought like crazy to get wines in California that were as good or better than the ones in France. And he was successful over his lifetime doing that. We had hoped to have a similar thing because our basic premise is that this is Fillmore State. It's the most beautiful place on the planet. It's got the widest variety of flora and fauna, different things growing. 500-700 different varieties of things grow in our mountains. And surely to God we can grow a few wine grapes, right? Not so much. I mean, we can, but we get bloom and we get rain and harvest. And when that happens, it messes up the bloom, which lowers the yields. And then in harvest, when that happens, it messes up the total pH, the acidity in the bricks right at the last minute when there's no time to act on it. And that's why it was so important this past few weeks ago with the Chardonnay to go in and get that Chardonnay right before that hurricane that was supposed to come through came through. They were calling for 12, 14 inches of rain. We got 1.5 inches. And they let school out because it was moist. Another made-for-TV disaster. That didn't actually happen. But that was our thinking, was to be a credible winery. We needed to have hundreds of acres of grapes. We had planted 100 acres of grapes back in the early 80s.
225 or so was the big thing, yeah.
And we had the French-American hybrid grapes were really successful. We had those up behind the greenhouse, and they would grow 14 tons an acre, and these huge sort of L-shaped bunches. And the problem was you make them into wine and you could sell it once. You can't ever sell it to the same person twice. Philippe Jordan used to take it and he'd heat it to 97 degrees Celsius, which is really dangerous because it's kind of like that charcoal starter. The first time you use it, it's safe, but when you spray it on the burning fire, and then you get back about this far and toss a match into it just to watch it go up like that. That's kind of what wine does at 97 degrees Celsius. And but by doing that, he stripped all the flavor out of it. And at least it didn't have that horrible French-American hybrid coating that you put on your tongue that no amount of scraping. And so we pulled all those out. We used to try to blend them, try to eat it and blend it. We just thought that stuff a bit more. Yeah.
A friend of mine used to work here years ago, and he said he remembers the vintner coming by, walking by, and saying, "Sugar Mama, nothing but sugar Mama."
Philippe told me one time, my mother doesn't like our wine, and she prefers Almaden Mountain Rhine wine, which is 5% sugar. And you can buy it down here in those big old jugs, and put it in the refrigerator. That's what she likes. And I like it at the time anyway. And I said, well, she'd come over to the house, and I told Philippe she doesn't like our wine. What should I do? And Philippe said, just take a full teaspoon of sugar and dissolve it in each glass before you give it to her. And so I would do that. And she would always say that I was the only one that had good Biltmore wine. I told Philippe, I said, are you supposed to do that? And he says, you people put sugar in tea. You don't do that. Why not do that? What's the difference? But it made my mother happy to have wine that she thought was tasty, and that's the whole point with hospitality and having people over for dinner is to try to adjust. So we didn't mind, and Philippe said it was okay.
What about some milestones or successes that you celebrated along the way?
Well, is Natalie still here?
She just stepped
Yeah,
up.
I thought I saw her sneak out, so I guess I can say this. We actually beat the carriage house almost every day now.
Yeah.
That was a big milestone for me. Anyway. I see the daily sales reports and yeah.
So put that in context with what Bill said about 53% of the guests come here. Wouldn't it be great if 75 were here? That would be a huge opportunity for us. But I think for me, my job has always been trying to fill a winery, just from a manufacturing standpoint, creating that balance of production and sales so that you're spreading all of your costs over as much production as you possibly can. So, first year we were open, sales were about maybe 13,000 cases. We could, with the original tank configuration, we could produce about 35,000 cases. Then we went to 100,000 and 150, and now we're a little over 200,000 cases of production capacity. So that's always been those thresholds for me and those decision points. That's just from now, I'd love to be able to see us hit those numbers, and we're probably running 85% of capacity, which is pretty good in terms of balance. Gives you an opportunity to move line around when you need to, but continue to make it grow. It's really been special. For us, I think times here where when we closed the courtyard, we were getting sales per square foot in that retail section that ran where the old, I'm not sure what we call them, that space that was on.
The old wine bar?
The old wine bar, the old...
new programs area.
That was our primary retail shop back then, and our sales per square foot were really high relative to what we were doing in other retail around the property. And Barbara Ann Smith was managing down here, and she and I talked a little bit. And we actually got Richard Presley to agree to this, which was a challenge.
Richard Presley was a long-time CFO.
He was a CFO for a long time. And so we did the numbers and worked it out and closed that. And that was a big radical change for us that, tripled the amount of square footage. And year in after that, the sales per square foot were pretty close to where they were after we made that move. But because we had more space, it was a tremendous infusion for us. So it was a good thing. Milestone, it's funny. I looked in preparation for this. I have in my office anytime anybody's downtown, I paying off the note for us. We spent a lot of time in trying to figure out, okay, where's cash coming from to pay the note?
$72,000 a month went to the bank.
To the bank.
Wow.
And so,
for 17 years.
Yeah.
And at the early days with the 3 bottles for every visitor, that didn't work out so well. 1 bottle for every 3 visitors, and we weren't making those numbers.
So when we paid off the note, Mr. Cecil Sr. was particularly pleased with that. And we had a ceremony upstairs in the Biltmore building, and we actually gave Wachovia the check on a bottle of sparkling. So I have a copy of the final payment on a bottle of sparkling. I hold dear to my heart. It was a big to do. So that's a milestone.
That label's probably not even legal with ATF.
No, and I didn't care. The check cleared, so that was good. So anyway, so that was a big milestone for us because there were times when we were challenged by that, and I guess. As we have developed, and Bernard and his team have done such a great job. When we opened, we had 5 guys back there. Is that about right? And when we were, and that was starting out, and when we were producing 100,000 cases the first time, selling 100,000 cases, we had 6 guys. Yeah. So the ability to be efficient and to develop that efficiency and to leverage that production capacity there was phenomenal. But the better part of that is how much the wines have improved over time. My first experience with Biltmore Wine and my first job, Mr. Cecil had a mailing list of folks, and when we used to make wine in the basement of the greenhouse, every Christmas we'd release some to the mailing list. And they'd come down to Biltmore Plaza, which is where our corporate office was back then, and we'd have an exchange there. And so that was interesting, but the wine wasn't particularly good, relatively speaking. I mean, I think it was good effort, and we were trying really hard, but But compared to where it is today, I mean, I used to have, when we go out and pour wine, it's like, okay, thanks. But it's changed, and the quality of the wine today is as high as anybody in the world. I mean, I think if you look top to bottom, and what I like about where we are with wine today, it's really well targeted at specific people and their taste profile. And that's the beauty of what Mr. Vanderbilt's desire was from the standpoint of, if you're a guest of Mr. Vanderbilt, it doesn't matter what I like, what's important is what you like. And so I want to get you what you want when you have dinner with me. When you're in my house, I want you to feel like whatever you want is there for you. Don't have to ask for it, it's there for you. And so we've got a broad range of wine that I think adapts very well. And what we've seen, and Bill challenged us, winemaking team, I want to see more 90 and above. Great. I mean, I want to see that.
In the last couple of years.
Yeah. And we continue to develop, and the wines that we make here, the wines that we make in California, that has been a real change for us. We used to, I think we used to have metals everywhere and all those kind of things. We don't count them anymore because it's just kind of, they're everywhere. And we've done such a good job with that over time. And I think that change has been a milestone for us. And our wines compete very well with anybody's wines. And I think, and that's nice. Makes me proud.
Y'all have any other questions? We only have mine. Questions? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I do have another one. As we think about the current story, and of course our sourcing of grapes, a lot is coming from California, specifically Napa, Sonoma. Has anybody been in touch with our contractors out there during the recent fires?
Sharon, I asked Sharon that question when we first got the fires out, and then Sharon has been in touch with me 3 or 4 times since then. She said that so far our direct contacts are in good shape and they're okay as of yesterday morning. Now, I haven't talked to her this morning. And the only one thing is that the hotel we all stay at, it's a DoubleTree in, what is it, Santa Rosa?
Yeah.
It was built in DoubleTree, whatever, same company. And it's got a restaurant attached to it that's really fine. We've been staying there for years, ever since we started our relationship. It's gone. It's burned to the ground. That restaurant, I think, is gone as well.
Wow.
It's a real nice, it was a real nice property. It was kind of bizarre. You'd be there, and buyers or growers from all over the world would be there buying California wines because it was centrally located to the whole area out there. It was a great property. So I'm kind of sorry to hear that. I know it's a beautiful location up on top of the hill overlooking sort of wine country everywhere. But Bill Crawford, who works for us, representing us to buy grapes and up, he's a little north of there and it's okay. He also works as a volunteer firefighter, and so he's been one of those missing people for some time. He's out of touch because all the cell service is down. I don't think it means he's missing. I just think he's missing his phone, and I hope he's still fine because he hauls large tanker loads of water to and from for firefighting purposes and other reasons because they don't have enough water up there. But so far, Sharon had checked with several people and said it was an absolute mess in some of the vineyards. But our people were in good shape that she was able to get in touch with. So
we are pretty much finished in harvest out there. We've got Syrah and some Merlot still hanging that so far have not been affected. So, but a lot of friends, a lot of people that I've talked to some people that I work with regularly had to evacuate, and they're down near Marin County, places to stay, hotels, waiting for it all to settle out. So it's pretty dramatic.
yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions. One of them, I thought I read somewhere that we were number 7 on the list of being in the top wineries in the United States. Is that correct? I saw
You
that.
saw that. That was, we just recently got ranked, I think it was USA Today, top 7 winery tours in the nation.
Yeah, I think that's a great selling point, and that I use it in my life. And another thing, what is your idea of growing muscadines? I get a lot of people want to know. But I hear it all the time.
Well,
muscadine. Do you think muscadine?
let me answer this first, and then you can join in. But muscadines here are not as easy to grow as they are down east. Okay, the elevation here, there's one cold hardy variety that can possibly work, but it's not a slam dunk to grow muscadine here. However, 2/3 or 3/4 of my winemaking team would leave if we made it. That has been presented to me in a variety of different ways, but very directly with that. Anyway, it's amazing. Muscadine's an amazing story right now, and particularly, in the time that we've been making wine, Duplin Winery in Rose Hill is the largest muscadine producer in the world, and they bonded about 2 years before we bonded our winery in 1983. So they were the first official bonded winery in North Carolina. Their business has grown dramatically because of the flavor profile of muscadine and how that fits. It doesn't really fit, in my mind, with Mr. Vanderbilt's environment and what he would like, respective to what I just said. But there's a place for it. And they're doing well. But I don't see that now. We may want to buy Duplin one day and make wine down here and sell it. But it's not something that fits for us, in my mind. Fits for us right here.
Yeah, that's the brand profile to answer that question. We thought about, if we were really trying to make the agricultural piece of this work, what we would do is go to NC State and we would have our soils reanalyzed. They've been analyzed over the years, but we'd have that updated. And then we would determine soil profiles and soil biology to determine what the soil has and what the plants need. And then we would match the soils to the plants. And if we're going to really do that again, we would definitely do that, and we would have made fewer mistakes rather than just trial and error on growing. But there are there are several varieties of native grapes that would grow here that we could attempt to grow. But again, the marketing profile and the positioning of Vanderbilt's probably doesn't fit with that. But I know we get that question a lot. There was a question.
I did have one, and that is there a plan for allowing people to come onto the estate to enjoy wine without having to purchase and a day-to-day
They can stay in the hotel.
Yeah, they can stay in the hotel. They can be a 12-month pass holder. Some sort of gate clearance, because we do quite often get the request of having a gardens pass or just a day pass or something where you don't have to visit the house and pay the full price for the ticket. Our fear and our research indicates that most people would take the lowest priced option, and that our business would go way down because they wouldn't value the inside experience of the house, especially if they could see the farm. And so we don't have any plans for just opening it up like the Asheville Mall or something.
But there's an interesting, just to add to that a little bit. One of the things that we've seen has provided great opportunity for us. You guys are benefiting from it with the Village Hotel opening even more so than the Inn. But when we have guests here 24 hours now, that the ability to grow the evenings here is dramatically improving. And so I think as we look at really penetrating lodging guests and having them spend time, particularly here with you guys, as opposed to other places in the village or everything, this is really kind of a central point for folks spending those evenings here. And I think there's a great opportunity there. And as we look at that and we figure out how what that means for us and how much capacity we have down here in the village, I think we're going to look at a lot of different variables. But right now, every time we let people in just to let them in, it's been problematic for us. And so right now.
There's another question.
Yeah, lady.
Well, it's not a question, but I did want to add to your story from a guest perspective.
Yeah.
Many years ago, I grew up in Kingsport, Tennessee. My father and I came down here to visit Biltmore Estate when the basement was first opened up, the downstairs part. He was a natural mechanic. He had a keen interest in finding out the mechanical workings of the house. So I lured him down here with that. I knew the winery. He's a, Christian man, born in the Bible Belt, and it was very controversial to have a winery in the Bible Belt. There was a lot of pushback in this area. And the whole area around here, people were very concerned that it might lead to everybody drinking too much. And I also think that it may have led to a little concern that it might cut into the moonshine business too.
That's a tough call.
It was an economic end that people covered up with the world. But I finally got him down here, and we went through the house and everything in the basement. He was so impressed, had such a wonderful time. We were headed out, and sure enough, we got stopped by somebody in the road saying, "How come you aren't going down to the winery?" In your ticket. Now, all morning long, my dad has been saying to me, "We shouldn't be having a winery in the South. It's wrong to encourage people to drink and all this stuff." And I said, "Well, Dad, they got this winery here. We should go look at it." "No, we're not going to do it." But as soon as he found out that it was included in the ticket, headed right down to the winery. Suddenly, it was okay. And he ended up buying a bottle of Riesling. I remember that he bought one bottle of Riesling and took that home. And of course, my mother's a real teetotaler, and she said, "You be keeping that in the garage." And so he was allowed to drink his Riesling in the garage. The next day, though, that changed every night he has a little glass of red wine, about that much over because he suddenly realized that, that was a joy that he didn't want to do without in his life.
Great story.
All right, we are out of time. Thank you all so much.